Welcome to Wicked Mysteries, the channel where we examine curious, strange, and often deadly events. In today's video, we uncover a trio of unusual happenings that all have one thing in common. They each involve a person desperately seeking revenge, and willing to do almost anything to get it. Our first story takes place in Cheshire, England. In the early hours of the 14th of July 2020, Corinna Smith calmly walked into the kitchen of her home, the home she shared with her husband of 38 years, Michael Baines. She filled the kettle to its max and flicked the switch. A few moments later, the water began to bubble and boil, with clouds of steam billowing from its spout. On this particular morning, instead of opening the cupboard to retrieve a mug to make some tea or coffee, she instead lined up 3 bags of sugar. She retrieved a bucket from the garden and decanted all the water into it. Then one by one she poured each 1 kilogram bag of sugar into the boiling water and mixed. Interestingly, when you mix a large quantity of sugar into boiling water, it creates a thick, viscous paste. In hindsight, the DIY caramel-like concoction is more suited to the confines of a prison setting than a domestic kitchen, but Smith clearly had a plan, and had done her research. After 13 long minutes of preparation, she walked the hallways of her home, potion in hand, and approached the bedroom where her husband lay sleeping. She entered the room, with the bucket by her side, and then stood over him. In one fell swoop, she raised the bucket and launched the entire contents over her unsuspecting husband's body. The piping hot, sticky liquid instantly clung to his arms and torso, jolting him awake from his slumber in an agonising blow. Smith then dropped the bucket, turned her back, and left their home as her husband lay screaming and writhing in pain behind her. Smith and Baines had one biological child together, a son named Craig. In 2007, at the age of 25, Craig sadly committed suicide. Smith also had a daughter from a previous relationship, and her daughter's confession was the catalyst for that day's gruesome events. The day before the attack, Smith was told by her daughter that both her and her brother Craig had been preyed upon and sexually abused by Baines for many years when they were children. Before Craig died, he was incarcerated for assault. He told his mum that the man he assaulted was a paedophile who had touched him sexually, and he just snapped. Between her daughter's shocking revelations and her son clearly being triggered by abuse at the hands of someone, in her mind, Smith believed the accusation to be true, and she was livid. While Craig did not accuse his father directly, it was plausible to her that after likely suffering abuse from Baines and possibly others, that Craig had turned to violence and then later suicide to try and escape his trauma and pain. The fury in Smith rumbled and bubbled just like the kettle she used during the attack, and just one day later her emotion and rage also boiled over. Dazed, she walked down her street. She travelled a full 9 houses away from the horrific scene she had created, and randomly knocked on the door of a neighbour she barely knew. The door opened and she quickly confessed to what she had just done, knowing she had hurt him, suspecting she may have killed him. The shocked neighbour called the emergency services immediately. Upon arriving, the paramedics found Michael whimpering in agony with severe burns on over 36% of his body and chunks of flesh peeling off his arm and hand. After spending a month in the hospital in grave condition, his body finally gave up, and the 81-year-old man died from his brutal injuries. It remains unclear if Smith actually intended to kill her husband that day, or if she just wanted to badly scar him. Perhaps she didn't even know the answer to that question herself. Regardless, she clearly wanted to inflict serious pain on him, like she believed he had done to her children. With Michael and Craig both gone now, the truth likely died with them, and any repercussions for the alleged abuse are long gone now too. The judge told Smith that while the motive behind her crime was understandable if true, the sinister nature of the attack could not be overlooked. The deadly liquid she created is often used in prison revenge attacks between inmates and is nicknamed napalm because of its devastating impact on the skin. Corinna Smith, at the age of 59, has now been charged with murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 12 years for her actions that day. She will be eligible for parole in 2032. Was this a case of calculated, cruel and unusual punishment between a husband and a wife? Or was it the story of a mother driven to lose all rationale at the discovery of her husband's sick betrayal and her children's torment? After the story broke, many heralded Corinna as a hero, while others branded her a monster. What would you have done in her shoes? Our next story took place on Halloween 2018 in South London. Carved pumpkins stood guard in doorways and excitement was tangible in the air as children looked forward to dressing up and trick-or-treating that evening. However, long before night would fall, bringing with it a night full of fun and frights, a true horror story was about to be written with a shocked audience in full view. In broad daylight, a construction worker approached a man while he stood near a children's playground and, seemingly unprovoked, savagely attacked him with a knife. He was brutal but swift in this 23-second-long attack, and in those few seconds the attacker managed to land 3 stab wounds to the unsuspecting man. The knife travelled 11 centimetres into the victim's body, puncturing his lung, and as he screamed for help and quickly collapsed, the perpetrator walked off with a smile across his face. Emergency services arrived quickly and tried their best to save the man, but less than 30 minutes after the attack he was pronounced dead at the scene. Members of the public were understandably stunned by what had just happened, and those who didn't see the events certainly heard it. Some even thought the screams they had heard were that of a wild bird before learning the gruesome truth. A stranger in the middle of the day had just approached a random man and murdered him without hesitation in the span of just a few seconds. As the story unfolds, however, it turns out that the attack wasn't random, but extremely calculated, and the 2 men were not strangers at all, but neighbours who had known each other most of their lives. To understand the backstory of the bizarre events of that fateful day, we have to travel back in time 18 years to the year 2000. Rocky Djelal had just been arrested as part of a murder inquiry. The investigation centred around the killing of 21-year-old Michael O'Rourke. Rocky was eventually released without charge as there was not enough evidence to tie him to the crime. The case ended without anyone being prosecuted. A young man was killed and whoever was guilty seemingly got away with it. 18 years later, at 2 p.m. on the 31st of October, the anniversary of Michael's funeral, his older brother Stephen O'Rourke put on a pair of work boots, paint-splattered trousers, a high-visibility vest and armed himself with a knife. He stalked Rocky Djelal like a predator hunting its prey, so much so he even camouflaged himself with his surroundings, further ensuring the element of surprise. Stephen was unemployed at the time and had purposefully dressed like a tradesman to blend in with other workers that were busy nearby. After following Rocky to the park, he finally decided to strike. Rocky, completely unaware of the imminent danger he was in, was busy laughing and chatting on the phone to his girlfriend when his life was quickly snatched from him. With the aid of witnesses and CCTV footage, the police were quickly on O'Rourke's trail and carried out a thorough search of his home with the aid of 2 sniffer dogs. The search proved fruitful when they managed to recover 2 high-visibility jackets, work boots, and a whole collection of knives. The murder weapon itself, however, was never found and was presumably disposed of quickly after the attack. Why did Stephen wait 18 years to get revenge? For some reason, in the weeks leading up to the attack, he was said to have become completely obsessed with his younger brother's death, and he wasn't shy about sharing his thoughts on the matter. His girlfriend, Stacey Brown, described him as running around like Rambo in the days before the attack, and sending non-stop paranoid texts, believing his brother's killers were linked to a building company called Nordic Construction, and referring to them as plastic gangsters he was going to take care of. He was talking about it constantly and messaging friends and family that he was ready to kill, and ready for his Valhalla. In Norse mythology, Valhalla is said to be the Hall of the Slain, where the souls of brave warriors who died a noble death would be rewarded with an eternity of feasting and fighting forever. It is essentially heaven for honourable heroes. Perhaps this is why Stephen smiled as he killed. He felt like a hero that had earned his glory and finally got his revenge. How noble it is to ambush an unarmed man in a children's play park is definitely debatable. Stephen's story quickly changed when it was time for court. He did not brag about the killing as he did before, but instead went with a self-defence approach. He alleged it was Djelal who had the knife, and that he was merely defending himself. The vast amount of CCTV footage and several witness accounts quickly countered that argument. The attack was clearly premeditated. He followed his target, dressed in a disguise to get close to him, had a weapon concealed in a carrier bag, and after the attack was spotted on CCTV changing his clothes 3 times to escape detection as he fled the scene. He also had help. Stephen's brother Jason was arrested for assisting an offender by taking his brother's clothes to be washed with the goal of destroying any forensic evidence they may contain. Jason took his own life while in prison awaiting trial. During the trial, both O'Rourke and Djelal's checkered pasts were laid bare. Both men had strong criminal tendencies and a clear violent streak. Djelal's supposed involvement in the death of Stephen's brother 18 years earlier doesn't seem too far-fetched when you learn of his other activities, but again no link was definitively proven in that case. Rocky was fresh out of prison at the time of the attack, and had left a long trail of carnage behind him. In 2008, he was jailed for 3 years for punching Arsenal footballer Sam Kanu, who had confronted him for trying to steal bottles of wine from a supermarket. Sam was savagely punched in the face, and was in a coma for 2 months as a result, and was ultimately left with severe brain damage, and sadly lost the ability to walk and talk. In 2013, he was again arrested for his involvement in a botched revenge attack that left Christopher Foster dead when he was jumped outside a pub. It was a case of mistaken identity, and he was not the intended target. He was a single dad with a 4-year-old daughter. In 2014, Djelal was jailed for 6 years for conspiracy to commit GBH that resulted in yet another murder. It seems neither O'Rourke or Djelal would find Valhalla waiting for them in the end, as neither of them understood honour, only brutality. So, was this a simple case of an eye for an eye, a brother's revenge, or 2 criminals' brutal pasts finally catching up with them? Should the past be forgotten and this crime viewed independently? Legally, maybe, but morally that is almost impossible to do. These 2 men, who each had friends and family who loved them, also chose to lead lives so deeply tainted in cruelty and savagery that perhaps a fate like this was almost inevitable. Leaving a lasting impact on those you meet throughout your life is a noble cause, but harming innocent people in order to make your mark on the world makes you far from a hero. Stephen O'Rourke was found guilty of murder and is facing a minimum of 25 years in prison. His final sentence is still pending. Michael O'Rourke's murder remains unsolved. Our final story takes us to Blackburn, England in November 2019. Alison McBlain and Christian Rivers were walking in town at around 7:45 p.m. They stopped at the edge of the road and made sure it was safe to cross. They began crossing the street, walking side by side, and just as the friends reached the pavement on the opposite side of the road, a car came barrelling towards them at breakneck speed. It mounted the pavement and struck the couple full force. The car was travelling with such power at the time of impact that one of the tyres completely blew out when striking the kerb. This collision was no accident. The driver did not lose control of the vehicle. No, this was a deliberate and ordered attack. The car, even though pretty badly damaged, and whoever was driving it quickly fled the scene. The vehicle was later found abandoned in an alleyway, and an attempt had been made to set fire to it. This attempt was only partially successful as the car did not fully burn. Back at the scene of the crime, the consequences of the horrific event were unfolding. Christian was badly injured but would ultimately survive the attack, as he had been pushed to the side when struck. Alison, however, had much more devastating injuries. She was struck so forcefully that her body smashed into the windscreen, shattering it, and leaving her footprint on the car before throwing her 42 feet from the site of impact. She was transported to hospital and in critical condition. 2 days later, after running an arsenal of tests, Alison was declared brain dead due to what were described as terrible and unsurvivable injuries. The machines keeping her alive were switched off, as her devastated family surrounded her, listening to her heartbeat one last time. She leaves behind a young son. The police investigation was in full swing, and the pressure was mounting now that the attack had resulted in death. CCTV captured the collision, and between that and the recovery of the vehicle and the DNA found inside it, information was quickly coming together. A link was found to a group known as the Bully Line Gang. The organisation had a phone line known as the Bully Line, where customers could call them and request drugs. The day before the attack, Alison and Christian had called the Bully Line and ordered £60 worth of hard drugs. Once delivered, Christian took the drugs without paying. Stealing from drug dealers comes with serious and violent consequences. The gang were looking to make an example out of the pair. The leaders of the gang put the word out that Alison and Christian were now on their blacklist, and even offered drugs as payment for information on their whereabouts. A tip-off quickly came in from Caris Poynton, a fellow drug dealer and drug user, keen to cash in on the promise of free drugs. She had just spotted the couple and called the Bully Line to give John Chatwood their location. He then set in motion the attack. Caleb Connolly was driving the car. Beside him sat Dean Keum. In the back of the vehicle were Joshua Titterington and an unnamed 16-year-old boy. They climbed into the car that night on a mission of revenge. All they needed was to find their victim's location, and a simple phone call from Poynton had done just that. The car sped off, ready to mow Alison and Christian down on sight. Within 10 minutes they had arrived, turned off the headlights and charged at the couple. Alison's family confirmed her ongoing battle with drugs, and that they had tried to help her for years conquer the disease of addiction. At the time of her death, she seemed to have her life under control. 6 months before the attack, she started a substance misuse program and was complying with it fully. Her mum and brother had hoped that this time would be the time that she could finally start living her life fully. However, her mother was also worried about her association with Christian Rivers, as she felt he was a bad influence as he was also an addict. This is a tale marred with addiction on all sides, young men using and dealing drugs, and desperate customers looking for a fix and willing to do whatever it took to get it. The defendants stated that Christian alone was the target, and that they weren't trying to kill him or Alison, but they did want to send a message. They couldn't have their reputation questioned, and anyone who stole from them would pay, one way or another. Caris Poynton befriended Alison's family and told them she had information that would help the police in their investigation. The family were completely stunned when they learned of her betrayal and involvement in the crime. Did she do this out of guilt for her involvement in setting Alison up? Or was this a failed attempt at self-preservation? In total, 6 people faced prosecution for what happened that night. Caleb Connolly, who drove the car, was sentenced to life with a minimum of 14 years for murder and attempted murder. Dean Keum, who was a passenger, was sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years for murder and attempted murder. Joshua Titterington, also a passenger, was sentenced to 17.5 years for attempted GBH and murder. Although not present in the car, John Chatwood was sentenced to 14 years for manslaughter for his part in planning and ordering the attack. Also not present in the car was Caris Poynton. She was sentenced to life with a minimum of 13 years for her part in facilitating the murder and attempted murder. The 16-year-old boy who was a passenger in the car during the attack cannot be named for legal reasons and was cleared of all charges and released. Lives ruined and a life lost, all for the small price of £60. This case, of course, is not as simple as that. Instead, it speaks to the effects of a society poisoned by poverty, crime, poor mental health support, and addiction. An avoidable tragedy with far-reaching ramifications for anyone it touched, and a story that is unfortunately doomed to repeat itself. Thank you so much for watching. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and turn on the notifications for more wicked mysteries. Remember, always lock your doors and windows, and if you're anything like me, always have an axe nearby just in case. I'll see you in the next one.